They pounded on my door late at night, flashing fake badges and threatening to drag me away in handcuffs. My so-called crime? Defying the neighborhood HOA. Their voices dripped with authority, their uniforms convincing enough to fool almost anyone. But here's the twist they never saw coming. Behind this door, I wasn't just another homeowner. I was the one person they should have feared most. What happens when an HOA tries to intimidate the wrong neighbor? Keep watching. I moved into this neighborhood expecting peace. The kind of quiet, tree-lined streets where kids rode their bikes freely, and neighbors waved from freshly trimmed lawns. On the surface, it looked like the perfect community, a place where my family could finally settle without worry. For a while, it even felt that way. Weekends were filled with cookouts, the smell of barbecues drifting through the air, and casual conversations at the mailbox. But underneath that calm, there was something else, a tension that only longtime residents seemed to understand. The HOA was everywhere. Their rules were posted, repeated, whispered about like gospel. Grass too long. Expect a warning. Paint your door the wrong shade? You'd be fined. Even parking your car a few inches off from where they wanted could earn you a letter taped to your door. At first, I tried to brush it off. Rules were rules, right? Every community had them. And besides, I wasn't here to make enemies. I wanted to keep my head down, pay my dues, and focus on work and family. Still, it was hard not to notice how fast things escalated for others. A neighbor once left his trash can out an extra day, and the HOA fined him more than what most people pay for groceries in a week. Another family was forced to repaint their house, even though the color difference was nearly impossible to see. It wasn't just about keeping order, it was about control. The HOA board carried themselves like they owned the entire street. They smiled in public, but everyone knew their power came from intimidation. They could make life miserable if they wanted to, and they often did. I told myself it wouldn't touch me. After all, I followed the rules. I mowed on time, paid on time, and stayed out of the drama. But then came the first letter, neatly folded, stuffed into my mailbox, stamped with that HOA logo like a warning seal. According to them, I was out of compliance. The accusation was laughable, but the message behind it wasn't. That was the beginning. A single harmless letter meant to remind me of my place. But it planted a seed, a shadow that told me the peace I thought I had wasn't real. What I didn't know then was just how far the board was willing to go to enforce their power. Because when intimidation didn't work, they decided to send something worse. They decided to send the police, or at least men pretending to be. The first letter might have seemed harmless, but it was only the start. Within weeks, more notices followed. According to the HOA, my grass was half an inch too tall. My mailbox was not the approved shade of white, and my driveway had visible cracks that needed immediate repair. Each letter came with threats of fines, and each one was colder than the last. It didn't matter that I kept my yard immaculate. It didn't matter that my mailbox was factory issued. The goal wasn't compliance, it was pressure. A constant stream of warnings, as if they were trying to wear me down. Neighbors began to whisper. They'd seen the same tactic before. The board picked a target, usually someone who wouldn't bow quickly, and pushed until they either gave in or moved out. One man down the street eventually sold his home after years of harassment over the color of his shutters. Another neighbor racked up so many fines that the HOA threatened to foreclose on his property. I refused to be bullied. Every notice they sent, I documented. Every threat I saved. But the board didn't back down. If anything, they escalated. It started small. Anonymous calls late at night. Hang-ups that left the line humming in the dark. Then cars slowing down in front of my house, lingering just long enough to make me feel watched. I'd step outside and the headlights would flicker off before the car drove away. It was intimidation, plain and simple. When that didn't work, they tried embarrassment. One morning, I found a giant orange sticker plastered on my garage door, announcing in bold letters that my home was in violation. Anyone passing by would see it. Neighbors stared. Some avoided eye contact. Others shook their heads with quiet sympathy. That was the HOA's favorite tactic, public shaming. But I wouldn't break. I pushed back, filing official disputes, demanding evidence. My resistance seemed to infuriate them. And then came the letter that made my blood run cold. Failure to comply may result in law enforcement action. It was a hollow threat, I thought. HOAs didn't control the police. They couldn't drag me out of my own house over a mailbox or a crack in the driveway. Still, the language was designed to scare, and it worked for a moment, until the night they proved they were willing to go further. It was after midnight when the pounding started. Hard, deliberate knocks rattled the front door. Voices barked through the wood, ordering me to open up. I peeked through the window and froze. Flashing badges, uniforms, even utility belts glinting under the porch light. It looked real, but something was off. The cars parked out front had no markings. The badges looked flimsy, the uniforms mismatched. And then I caught it. The patch on one man's sleeve wasn't from any department I'd ever seen. The HOA had sent imposters, men pretending to be officers, sent to scare me into obedience. The question now wasn't whether they would stop. It was, how far were they really willing to go? The pounding on the door grew louder, each thud echoing through the house like a war drum. Their shouts carried authority, the kind that could make most people's knees buckle. But I wasn't most people. I wasn't the frightened homeowner they thought they could bully into submission. I opened the door slowly, letting the porch light spill across their fake uniforms. Their badges flashed as they barked orders demanding I step outside. Neighbors were peeking through curtains, some even slipping out onto porches, whispering nervously. The HOA wanted a spectacle. They wanted to see me dragged out in front of everyone. But here's what they didn't know. I was the chief of police. And these men standing on my doorstep, pretending to be officers, had just walked into a trap of their own making. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply asked them for their department, their commanding officer, their badge numbers. Simple questions. Ones any real cop could answer without hesitation. The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd of neighbors grew, faces pressed closer to windows. Phones began to record. Then I pulled out my own badge, the real one. The weight of authority gleamed in the porch light as I held it up. "Gentlemen," I said, "I am the police." The color drained from their faces. One stammered, another took a half step back. The illusion shattered instantly, and with it the HOA's carefully constructed intimidation scheme. I called it in right there on the porch. Within minutes, real squad cars rolled into the neighborhood, lights flashing, sirens cutting through the night air. The imposters were cuffed and led away under the watchful eyes of stunned neighbors. Gasps, whispers, and even a few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd as the truth spread. But the most powerful moment came when I turned toward the HOA board members who had crept into the street. Watching their plan unravel, I didn't have to say much. Just one sentence that landed heavier than any fine they'd ever issued. You picked the wrong house. The humiliation was public. Their authority shattered. The entire neighborhood now saw what they were willing to do, how far they'd go to keep control. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. But this wasn't just about one night. What happened next would change everything. The imposters were hauled away that night, their fake uniforms bagged as evidence, their desperate excuses drowned out by the flashing lights. But the real victory wasn't their arrest. It was the silence that fell over the neighborhood afterward. For the first time in months, the HOA had nothing to say. Their threats, their warnings, their endless notices stopped. Word spread quickly. Families who had once whispered in fear now spoke openly about their own experiences. Fines that made no sense, intimidation tactics that had gone too far, letters meant to humiliate instead of help. The board's authority, once absolute, crumbled under the weight of exposure. I pressed charges, not only against the men who showed up at my door, but against the board members who orchestrated it. Investigations revealed financial misuse, fabricated violations, and years of bullying disguised as community standards. Several members were forced to resign. Others faced legal consequences. For the first time, the neighborhood could breathe. Driveways filled with cars again without fear of fines. Kids played without someone measuring the length of their toys left on the lawn. Even the houses seemed brighter, as if the community itself had been waiting for this moment of freedom. Neighbors I had barely spoken to before came by to thank me. Some admitted they had been on the verge of selling, ready to abandon their homes just to escape the suffocating control. Others said they wished they had stood up sooner but were grateful someone finally had. As for me, I didn't see myself as a hero. I saw myself as someone who refused to bend, someone who believed that a home should be a sanctuary, not a battlefield. But the impact went beyond our street. News of the incident spread online. The absurdity of an HOA sending fake cops made headlines, sparking conversations across the country. People everywhere began sharing their own HOA horror stories, proof that this wasn't just about one neighborhood. It was about a system that sometimes allowed petty power to run unchecked. In the end, the board was replaced with people who actually cared about the community, not about controlling it. Rules became guidelines, not weapons, and slowly trust began to rebuild. I learned something important through it all. The worst kind of authority is the one that hides behind fake rules and false power. But even the most intimidating force can crumble when someone is willing to stand up and say, "Enough," because sometimes the only way to protect your home is to fight for it. So I'll leave you with this question. If your HOA, or anyone in power, pushed you this far, would you have the courage to push back?